The alarm on my console screamed before I even opened my eyes. I had been dozing in the pilot chair of the Wanderlight, my boots up on the dash, when the proximity sensor cut through my sleep like a blade. Red light washed over the cockpit. A ship was falling out of orbit above me, trailing fire, and it was not falling by accident. I sat up so fast my neck cracked. On the scanner, a sleek silver vessel spun end over end through the upper atmosphere of the moon below, chased by 3 armored patrol ships firing streams of white plasma. This was not my fight. Every instinct I had built over 8 years of salvage work told me to turn my ship around and vanish into the black before those patrol ships noticed me. But then the falling ship sent out a signal, not a normal distress call. This one was old, encrypted, desperate, the kind of signal that only fires when a pilot knows they are not walking away from the landing. I should have ignored it. I did not. I slammed the throttle forward and dove the Wanderlight straight into the falling debris field, dodging chunks of broken hull and burning metal as the moon's gravity dragged everything down at once. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, weaving between fire and wreckage while my ship's frame groaned in protest. The silver ship hit the surface a few seconds before I did, plowing a long black scar across a rocky plain lit orange by 2 dying suns. I brought the Wanderlight down hard beside it, dust exploding around my landing struts, and I was out of my seat and running before the engines even finished cooling. The wreck was worse up close. The hull was cracked open like an egg, wires sparking, smoke pouring from a dozen seams. My scanner picked up 1 heartbeat inside, faint and slowing. I climbed through the broken hull, cutting my palm on a jagged edge of metal without even feeling it, and found her in the wreckage of what used to be a cockpit. She was not human. That much was obvious even through the smoke. Her skin held a faint silver sheen, like moonlight caught under the surface, and her eyes, when they opened and found mine, were a deep violet that seemed to hold more light than the wreck around us. She was young, my age maybe, and she was terrified. She said something in a language I did not understand, sharp and fast, her voice cracking with pain. My suit's translator struggled to catch up, spitting out broken fragments. "Help. Please, they cannot find me." I did not need a translator to understand fear. I got my arms under her and pulled her free of the crushed seat restraints, just as something deep in the ship's core let out a groan that I felt in my teeth. That sound meant one thing: the reactor was failing. I ran. I do not remember most of that run. I remember the heat on my back, the way the ground shook, and the way she gripped my jacket with a strength that surprised me for someone so hurt. I remember throwing both of us behind a jagged outcrop of rock, just as the wreck behind us lit the sky white and threw a wave of heat and sound across the plain that knocked the breath out of my lungs. When I looked up, the wreck was gone. In its place was a smoking crater and a column of black smoke rising into the twin sunset. She was still breathing. That was the only thing that mattered in that moment. I carried her back to the Wanderlight, my arms shaking from the weight and the adrenaline, and laid her down on the medical cot in my cargo bay. My hands moved through steps I had learned from a dozen field medic manuals, cleaning wounds, stopping bleeding, stabilizing what I could. She watched me the entire time with those violet eyes, never looking away, never making a sound, even when I knew what I was doing had to hurt. I had barely closed the last wound when my proximity alarm screamed again. 3 patrol ships had entered the moon's atmosphere. They were not looking for wreckage anymore. They were looking for a survivor. I threw myself back into the pilot's seat, engines roaring to life beneath me, and hauled the Wanderlight off the ground just as the first patrol ship crested the ridge behind us, weapons already tracking. I did not know who they were. I did not know why they wanted her. I only knew the look on her face when she heard their engines, a look that told me everything I needed to know about what would happen to her if they caught up. I pushed the throttle to its limit, weaving through the moon's thin atmosphere, alarms blaring as plasma fire scorched past my hull close enough to rattle the windows. The Wanderlight was not built for combat. It was built for hauling scrap and dodging debris fields, but in that moment it flew like it understood exactly what was at stake. I broke atmosphere with one patrol ship still on my tail, its weapons locking onto my engines. I had one card left to play, and it was a reckless one. I cut power to my rear thrusters for half a second, just long enough to drop speed and let the pursuing ship overshoot past me, then slammed full power back into the engines and hit the jump drive before it could correct. The stars stretched into long white lines around us, and then the patrol ship, the moon, and the burning wreckage were gone, replaced by the quiet hum of open space. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. My hands were still shaking on the controls. Behind me, in the cargo bay, I heard her let out a slow breath, the first sound of relief since I had pulled her from the wreck. I turned in my seat to look at her properly for the first time. This stranger from a species I did not recognize, wrapped in a torn silver flight suit, bruised and bleeding, but alive, because I had made a choice I still did not fully understand. She met my eyes and spoke again, slower this time, as if she was trying hard to be understood. My translator caught most of it now. "Thank you. You do not know what you have done." I remember laughing, a short, exhausted sound, and telling her I did not need to know. I had just wanted her to live. She looked at me for a long moment after that, studying my face the way you study something you do not expect to find twice. Then she said something that I would not fully understand until much later, something that settled into my chest like a stone dropped into still water. "You may have saved more than you realize." I did not know it yet, but those 3 patrol ships were only the beginning. Somewhere far beyond the edge of that system, alarms of a very different kind were already lighting up on ships that belonged to people far more powerful than any border patrol. And every one of them now knew exactly one thing: she was alive, and she was not alone. I did not sleep that night, if you could even call it night out in open space where the stars never blink, and time only means whatever the ship's clock says it means. I sat at the edge of the cargo bay, watching her sleep on the medical cot, my mind racing through everything that had happened in the last few hours. A stranger from an unknown world, 3 armed patrol ships willing to blow apart a moon just to catch her. A look of pure terror on her face that I could not shake from my memory. I told myself I would drop her at the nearest neutral station, collect whatever answers I could, and go back to my quiet life of scrap hauling and asteroid mapping. That was the plan. It lasted about 6 hours. She woke with a start, sitting up so fast that she nearly tore open the wound on her side that I had spent an hour closing the night before. I was across the room before I even realized I had moved, easing her back down, telling her she was safe, that the ship was secure, that nobody was chasing us anymore. She did not understand most of my words, but she understood my tone. Her shoulders slowly relaxed, and she let me check the wound again. Up close, in better light, she looked different than she had in the wreckage. Her silver skin seemed to shift faintly, depending on the angle, catching light in ways human skin never could. Her hair was a deep shade of blue-black, braided in a pattern too precise to be casual. Even hurt and frightened, there was something in the way she held herself, some quiet certainty, that told me she was used to being important. Not important in the way a skilled worker is important. Important in the way a piece on a chessboard is important to the players holding it. I introduced myself first, tapping my chest and saying my name slowly. "Ethan." She studied me for a moment, then touched her own chest and said a word that the translator rendered as Alira. It was a start. Over the next 2 days, we built a strange kind of communication between us. Half-broken words from her translator, half gestures and expressions that needed no language at all. I learned that her people were called the Veyron, that she came from somewhere far beyond the borders my own government had ever charted, and that the patrol ships hunting her belonged to something called the Draith Order, a hostile faction that had been at war with her people for longer than my own species had been building starships. What she did not tell me, not yet, was why she mattered so much to either side. I noticed the way she flinched whenever I offered her human food, as if some instinct in her recognized danger where there was none. I noticed the way she watched the medical scanner readouts with something close to fear, especially when it displayed anything related to blood or tissue samples. I noticed, most of all, the way she avoided answering any question about her family, her title, or her home, deflecting with a skill that told me she had been trained for exactly this kind of conversation long before she ever met me. On the third day, disaster nearly caught up with us. I had set a course for Korvax Station, a neutral trading post on the edge of contested space where nobody asked too many questions if you paid well enough. It was supposed to be a quiet stop to resupply and quietly figure out where to take her next. We were 3 hours out when my long-range scanner picked up a ship matching the signature of the patrol vessels that had chased us off the moon. It was not close enough to see us yet, but it was moving on a search pattern that would eventually cross our path. I killed our engines and let the Wanderlight drift silent and dark, powering down every non-essential system, hoping we would read as nothing more than space debris on their scanners. Alira sat beside me in the cockpit, close enough that I could feel the tension radiating off her. Neither of us spoke. We watched the dot on the scanner creep closer, then hold steady, then slowly move away. I did not realize I had been holding my breath until it finally faded from the display. She let out a long, shaking exhale beside me, and for a moment, her guarded expression cracked. She looked at me, really looked at me, and said something that the translator caught almost perfectly this time. If they find me, they will not simply capture me, they will use me, and if they use me, many people will suffer who have done nothing wrong. I asked her what she meant, but she shook her head and looked away, retreating back behind the same wall she always put up whenever the conversation drifted too close to the truth. I did not push, not yet. I had learned enough in my years hauling salvage through dangerous space to know that people share their secrets when they are ready, not when you demand it. Instead, I did something simpler. I made her a cup of the only hot drink my ship's kitchen could manage, a bitter synthetic tea that I mostly kept around for cold nights on long hauls, and I sat with her in silence while the stars slid past the window. She drank it slowly, watching me the entire time, and for the first time since I had pulled her from the wreckage, she looked less like a frightened stranger and more like someone starting, carefully, to trust me. Over the following day, small things began to change between us. She started sitting in the cockpit beside me instead of staying in the cargo bay. She began pointing at objects around the ship and asking their names, practicing the words with a determination that told me she wanted to understand my world as much as I wanted to understand hers. She even laughed once, a short surprise sound, when I fumbled trying to pronounce a word in her language and got it completely wrong. It was in that laugh that I felt something shift in my chest, something I was not prepared for and did not fully understand yet. We arrived at Korvax Station under a false transponder code I had used before for less legal salvage runs. The station itself was a sprawling mess of docking arms and market stalls built into the hollowed core of an old asteroid, home to traders, smugglers, and travelers from a dozen different systems who all agreed on one thing, that questions were bad for business. I told Alira to keep her hood up and stay close as we moved through the crowded corridors toward the section of the station where I knew a broker who dealt in information nobody else wanted to sell. If anyone could tell me who the Draith Order was and why they wanted her so badly, it would be him. The station was loud, bright, and chaotic, filled with more species than I had names for, and for a moment I let myself believe we had actually found somewhere safe to breathe. Then I saw the broker's stall standing empty, its shutters torn half off the hinges, and a cold feeling settled into my stomach. Something had already gone wrong here, and whatever it was, I had a feeling it was about to become our problem. The broker's stall was not just closed, it had been ransacked. Shelves lay tipped over, their contents scattered across the floor, and a thin trail of dark fluid led from behind the counter toward a side corridor that most travelers avoided because it led nowhere good. I pulled Alira back against the wall beside me, my heart hammering, scanning the crowd for anyone paying us too much attention. Nobody seemed to notice us. That was almost worse. It meant whoever had done this was already gone, and they had been quiet about it. "We should leave," I told her quietly. "Right now." She did not argue. We moved fast through the station, cutting through side corridors instead of the main concourse, my hand resting near the small sidearm I kept holstered, but rarely used. I had spent most of my career avoiding trouble, not walking toward it, but every instinct in me now said trouble had already found us before we ever set foot on this station. We were 3 corridors from the docking bay when a voice called out behind us, calm, almost friendly, in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Alira of the Veyron line. It has been a long search." I turned to see a tall figure step out from a side passage, dressed in dark reinforced armor, unlike anything the patrol ships had worn. 2 more figures flanked him, weapons drawn but not yet raised, the posture of people who were confident they did not need to rush. Alira went rigid beside me. I felt her hand grip my arm, not out of fear this time, but out of something closer to dread recognition. "These are not Draeth," she whispered. "These are my own people." That single sentence rearranged everything I thought I understood about our situation. The lead figure took a slow step forward, his eyes fixed on Alira with an expression that held no warmth at all, despite the gentle tone of his voice. He introduced himself as Kale, a retrieval officer of the Veyron Accord, and he explained, calmly, that Alira needed to come with him immediately for the safety of her people. I asked him what gave him the right to demand that. His eyes flicked to me for the first time, assessing, dismissive, the way you might look at an insect that had wandered somewhere it did not belong. "You do not understand what she is," he said. "This is not your concern." Alira stepped slightly in front of me then, her voice sharper than I had heard it since the crash. She spoke rapidly in her own language, and though my translator struggled to keep up, I caught enough fragments to understand she was refusing to go quietly, demanding answers of her own, accusing him of things I did not fully understand, yet involving words like vessel, and key, and successor. Kale's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, a readiness that told me this conversation was about to stop being a conversation. I made a decision in that half-second that I would spend the rest of my life grateful for. I grabbed Alira's hand and pulled her hard into the side corridor behind us, breaking into a run as Kale's voice rose behind us, no longer calm, ordering his men forward. We ran through the guts of the station, past startled traders and shouting merchants, weapons fire cracking against the walls behind us, scorch marks blooming on metal just inches from where we had been standing a moment before. Alira moved faster than I expected, clearly no stranger to danger despite her sheltered bearing, guiding us through turns I would never have found on my own, as if some part of her recognized the layout of danger itself. We burst into the docking bay just as an alarm began blaring through the station security scrambling in confusion, unsure yet whose side they were even supposed to take in a fight they did not start. I got the Wanderlight's ramp down and shoved Alira inside, turning to fire 2 warning shots back down the corridor to buy us seconds, then sprinted up the ramp myself as it began to close. The engines roared to life beneath me as I threw myself into the pilot seat, hands flying across the controls with a speed born entirely of terror. Outside, I saw Kale and his men burst into the docking bay, weapons raised, but the Wanderlight was already lifting off the deck, clearing the bay doors just as the first shots sparked harmlessly off our rear shielding. We broke free of the station and hit open space, and I did not slow down until the station was nothing more than a distant glint of light behind us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The adrenaline slowly drained out of my body, leaving my hands shaking against the controls. Then I turned to look at her, and I finally asked the question I had been holding back since the moment we escaped the burning wreck on that moon. "What are you, really?" She was silent for a long time, staring out at the stars, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, stripped of all the guarded formality she usually carried. She told me the truth. Her people, the Veyron, had been locked in a slow, grinding conflict with the Draith Order for generations, a war fought not with vast armies, but with something far more valuable: genetic science capable of unlocking or destroying entire ecosystems, entire species, entire futures. Long ago, her ancestors had created something called the living vessel, a genetic failsafe woven so deeply into her bloodline that it could only be activated, or unmade, through a Veyron of direct royal descent. She was that descendant. Inside her, she explained, lay the key to a weapon so powerful that both her own people and the Draith Order had spent decades trying to control her, not because they cared whether she lived or died, but because whoever controlled her controlled the balance of the entire war. Her own family, she admitted quietly, had raised her not as a daughter, but as an asset to be protected until the moment they decided she was needed. The retrieval officer, Kale, was not there to save her. He was there to bring her home so she could be used exactly as her family had always intended. I sat there in silence, trying to absorb the weight of what she had just told me. I had thought I was rescuing a frightened stranger from a random accident. Instead, I had pulled a living weapon out of the wreckage of a war I knew nothing about, and now every faction in this part of the galaxy wanted her, alive, controlled, and ready to be used. I asked her the only question that mattered to me in that moment: not what she was, who she wanted to be. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something between disbelief and quiet hope, as if nobody had ever framed the question that way to her in her entire life. "I do not know," she admitted softly. "Nobody has ever asked me that before." I told her she had time to figure it out. I told her that as long as she was on my ship, nobody was going to make that choice for her. She did not say anything else for a long while after that. She simply reached over and rested her hand lightly against mine on the console, a small gesture, but one that felt heavier than anything either of us had said. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly in every direction, and somewhere behind us, I knew both the Draith Order and her own people were already regrouping, already planning their next move to reclaim what they believed belonged to them. I did not know yet how far either side was willing to go to get her back. I was about to find out. 3 days after Korvax Station, my ship's medical scanner picked up something that changed everything. It happened by accident. Alira had cut her hand on a broken panel while helping me repair a damaged coolant line. Nothing serious, just enough to need a bandage. When I reached for the medical kit, my own hand, still scraped from the night I pulled her out of the wreckage, brushed against the wound. The reaction was immediate and impossible to ignore. A faint golden light rippled across her skin at the point of contact, spreading briefly along the lines of the cut before fading away, leaving the wound completely healed, as if it had never happened at all. We both stared at her hand in silence. I had seen her healing scans over the past week. Her people healed faster than humans, but never like this, never instantly, and never with light. I asked her what had just happened, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely afraid, not of an enemy, not of capture, but of something she did not understand herself. She ran the same test twice more, carefully, deliberately, pressing my hand against a small cut on her arm. Both times, the same golden light appeared, and both times, the wound closed instantly. "It should not be possible," she whispered. "The living vessel only responds to Veyron royal blood. It has never reacted to anything else, not once in the recorded history of my people. I did not understand the significance of it yet, not fully, but I understood enough to know this was not a small thing." She spent the next several hours running diagnostics, using equipment built into a small device she had kept hidden in her flight suit since the crash, something she had refused to explain to me until now. It was a genetic scanner, designed to read the unique signature of the living vessel within her blood. When the results came back, her hands were shaking. According to the scan, my blood carried a compound, something in my human physiology, that acted as a catalyst for the living vessel, amplifying and stabilizing it in ways her own scientists had spent generations trying and failing to achieve artificially. I was not simply the man who had saved her life. Somehow, impossibly, I was part of the exact thing both warring empires had spent decades trying to unlock. I sat down hard on the edge of the cargo bay, trying to process what she was telling me. I had grown up an ordinary human, nothing special, a scrap hauler who barely finished technical school before taking to the stars for lack of better options. The idea that something in my blood mattered to a war between two alien civilizations felt too enormous to be real. But the golden light did not lie. Illyra sat beside me, her expression a mixture of wonder and fear that mirrored my own. "If this is true," she said quietly, "then you are no longer someone they merely capture to reach me. You are now something they will hunt for yourself." We did not have long to sit with that realization. That night, the Wanderlight's proximity alarm tore through the silence again, sharper and more urgent than before. Not one ship this time, but three, closing fast from different directions, cutting off any clean escape route. Two carried the markings of the Draith Order. One carried the sigil of the Varen Accord. They had found us. And worse, judging by the way all three converged at once, instead of fighting each other first, I understood with sick clarity that word of what I was had already spread beyond Illyra's own people. Everyone wanted us now, not just her. I threw the ship into evasive maneuvers, weaving through a nearby debris field left over from some long-forgotten battle, using broken hulls and drifting wreckage as cover, while plasma fire streaked past on all sides. Illyra strapped into the seat beside me, calling out warnings from the sensor display, her voice steady despite the chaos, guiding me through gaps in the wreckage that I would never have spotted on my own. We took a hit along the rear stabilizer that sent the whole ship shuddering violently, alarms screaming from a dozen systems at once. I fought to keep us steady, diving lower into the debris field where the larger warships could not easily follow. It was Illyra who spotted the narrow gap in an old collapsed freighter hull, barely wide enough for the Wanderlight to slip through. I threaded the needle with my teeth clenched and my hands white-knuckled on the controls, and for one terrifying second, the hull scraped along both sides of our ship before we burst out the other side into open space. Behind us, one of the pursuing ships clipped the wreckage trying to follow and spun out of control, buying us the seconds we desperately needed. I slammed the jump drive online, and we tore away into hyperspace, just as the remaining ships opened fire on empty space where we had been a moment before. When the stars finally settled back into place around us, silence fell over the cockpit, broken only by the ragged sound of our own breathing. Illyra turned to me, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something new in her expression. Not fear, not the guarded formality of a princess raised to be an asset, but something fiercely protective. "They will not stop," she said. "Not for me, not for you, not until either the living vessel is fully controlled or destroyed along with everyone connected to it." I asked her what she wanted to do. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight I had never heard from her before, the sound of someone stepping fully out of the role others had built for her. "I do not want to be used anymore," she said, "and I do not want you used either. If we are going to survive this, we do it together, on our own terms, not theirs." I told her I was already all in, long before either of us understood what we truly were to the people hunting us. She managed a small, tired smile at that, the first real smile I had seen from her since the crash. We had no fleet, no army, no vast resources to draw on. We had a damaged salvage ship, a dwindling fuel reserve, and two impossible truths neither empire fully understood yet. Truths that made us both the most wanted and the most dangerous variables in a war that had been grinding on long before either of us was born. Somewhere out there, Both the Draith Order and the Varen Accord were regrouping, recalculating, preparing to close the net around us with everything they had. We had bought ourselves a little time, not much, but enough, maybe, to figure out exactly what we were going to do with the only advantage we had left: each other. We had 2 days before the fuel reserves ran too low to jump again, and we spent every hour of it planning. Illyra explained everything she knew about the living vessel, piecing together fragments of half-remembered lessons from tutors who had never expected her to need this knowledge outside of ceremony. The vessel, she told me, was never meant to be a weapon in the way both empires now treated it. It had been created generations ago as a failsafe, a way to either heal a dying world or, if necessary, to unmake one, activated only through the combination of Varen royal blood and a rare catalyst that her ancestors had lost the secret to producing. That catalyst, impossibly, was somehow present in me. Neither of us fully understood why. It was possible some ancient contact between our species, buried in history neither of us had access to, had left the compound dormant in human blood for generations, waiting for the right combination to awaken it. It did not matter how, it only mattered that it was true, and that both warring empires now believed capturing us together would let them finally control the living vessel completely. We decided we were not going to let that happen. Illyra told me of an old, mostly forgotten Varen research outpost, hidden deep inside a nebula that both empires had abandoned decades ago after a failed experiment rendered the surrounding space too unstable to be worth the resources to reclaim. It was there, she believed, that the original activation chamber for the living vessel still remained, untouched, a place where she might finally be able to understand what the vessel truly was, and perhaps find a way to end its usefulness as a weapon forever. It was a desperate plan built on old legends and half-remembered lessons. It was also the only plan we had. We reached the nebula with our fuel reserves nearly empty, the Wanderlight groaning under the strain of the unstable radiation fields swirling around us. The outpost appeared exactly where Illyra remembered it, a hollowed asteroid station, dark and silent, drifting untouched for decades. We were not alone for long. Both the Draith Order and the Varen Accord had clearly reached the same conclusion we had, tracking the faint energy signature the vessel gave off whenever Illyra and I were near each other. Their ships emerged from the nebula's dense clouds almost simultaneously, cutting off any retreat, forcing all three of us into the same narrow stretch of space at once. For a moment, I thought we were finished, caught between two enemies who wanted the same prize and would happily fight through each other to get it. I got the Wanderlight docked at the outpost just as the first shots rang out behind us, the two rival fleets finally turning on each other in the chaos, neither willing to let the other claim us first. It bought us the only thing we needed: time. Illyra led me through the abandoned station at a run, past corridors coated in decades of dust, toward a chamber deep in its core that still hummed faintly with old power. At its center stood a device unlike anything I had ever seen, an intricate lattice of crystal and metal built around a single raised platform, clearly designed for exactly one purpose. She stepped onto the platform without hesitation. I followed, because there was no version of this where I let her face it alone. The moment we both stood within the lattice, the golden light I had seen once before in her wounded hand erupted around us, filling the chamber with a warmth that felt less like fire and more like the deep hum of something ancient waking up after a very long sleep. Illyra's voice rose beside me, steady despite the storm of energy swirling around us, speaking words in her own language that the translator could not keep up with. I understood enough from her expression alone. She was not activating a weapon. She was doing the opposite. She was unmaking the part of the vessel that had ever allowed it to become one. The light built to a blinding peak, and for a moment I felt something pass through me that I had no words for, ancient, vast, and strangely gentle, like a question being asked and answered all at once. Then it faded, leaving the chamber dim and quiet, the crystal lattice around us dark and inert for the first time in generations. Outside, the battle between the two fleets stuttered to a confused halt as both sides felt the sudden absence of the signal they had been chasing across the stars, the living vessel finally, permanently silent. Kale's voice crackled over an open channel moments later, tense, demanding to know what we had done. Illyra answered him herself, her voice calm and unwavering in a way I had never heard from her before, the voice of someone no longer speaking as an asset, but as an equal. She told him the truth. The weapon both empires had spent generations fighting over no longer existed. There was nothing left to capture, nothing left to control, only two people who had chosen, together, to end a war neither of them had started. There was a long silence on the channel before Kale finally spoke again, quieter this time, almost defeated. He did not threaten us. He simply asked what she intended to do now. Illyra looked at me before she answered, and for the first time since the crash on that burning moon, I saw something in her expression that was not fear, not duty, not the weight of a title she had never chosen. It was simply hope. She told him she intended to live, freely, on her own terms, and that whatever came next for the Veyron and the Draith would have to be built without her as a weapon caught between them. The fleets did not attack again. Whatever they had come for was gone, and neither side seemed willing to start a fight over nothing. We limped the Wanderlight away from that nebula on fumes, drifting quietly through open space until we found a small, unremarkable trading colony far from either empire's usual reach, a place where nobody asked questions about golden light or ancient weapons or princesses who had simply stopped answering to that title. Illyra stayed with me after that. Not because duty demanded it, and not because anyone was chasing us anymore, but because somewhere between a burning wreck on a forgotten moon and a hidden chamber deep inside a dying nebula, we had built something neither of us had expected to find. I still fly the Wanderlight today, hauling scrap and salvage through quiet corners of space that neither empire bothers to patrol. Illyra sits beside me in the cockpit, more often than not, no longer the frightened stranger I pulled from the wreckage, but someone who chose, deliberately and completely, the life she wanted instead of the one she was born into. Sometimes late at night, when the stars stretch long and silent around us, she reminds me of the first thing she ever said to me, back when neither of us understood what those words truly meant. You may have saved more than you realize. She was right. I had saved her life that day. But somewhere along the way, without either of us noticing exactly when it happened, she had saved mine right back. And out here, drifting quietly through the stars we chose for ourselves, that felt like more than enough.